In the glittering courts of Renaissance France, perfume was more than a luxury. It was the language of elegance, a mark of refinement, a veil that cloaked the stench of crowded streets and whispered of intimacy, power and desire. Women dabbed rosewater upon their wrists, nobles carried pomanders of ambergris and musk, and courtiers filled the air with the scent of lilies, violets and spices brought from distant lands. But beneath the sweetness of those fragrances lingered something darker. Hidden within flasks of crystal and vials of gilded glass, there sometimes rested not perfumes, but poisons. They were crafted with the same delicacy, mixed with herbs and powders, disguised in essences that masked their bitterness. One breath, one touch, a single drop brushed upon the skin could turn beauty into death. It was whispered that in the chambers of Paris and the salons of Versailles, women plotted with perfumers and apothecaries to rid themselves of rivals, husbands and lovers. Their weapons were invisible, their crimes concealed in the very air of seduction. The sweetness of jasmine might hide arsenic, the softness of violet might mask belladonna, and behind a smile might lie the promise of a silent grave. This is not the story of perfumes that delighted, but of perfumes that killed, of a world where beauty was a mask, where scent became a weapon, and where death moved quietly through the corridors of splendor. This is the tale of the perfumed poisoners of Renaissance France. Welcome to Scroll Historian. Here we unroll the forgotten pages of the past, stories of power, fear, and silence that history tried to hide. If you enjoy journeys into these hidden chapters, I invite you to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps keep history alive and ensures these stories reach others who seek to understand the shadows of the past. Now, let us begin. A court of splendor and chateaus. Renaissance France was a world where appearances ruled as firmly as kings. In the palaces of Paris and the glittering halls of the Louvre, nobility moved like actors upon a stage, their lives measured by display and ceremony. Clothing shimmered with silks and jewels, banquets dazzled with silver platters and endless wine, and the air itself was crafted to please, for every chamber was heavy with perfume. The use of scent was not mere vanity. It was necessity. The cities of France carried the foul odors of unwashed streets, of smoke and sewage, of rot that clung to the air. Perfume became the armor of refinement, the veil that separated noble from commoner. A drop of rosewater upon the wrist, a handkerchief steeped in violet, a fan brushed with musk. These were not luxuries, but the very language of status. In this court of elegance, perfumes were more than adornment. They were currency of seduction and tools of power. A carefully chosen fragrance could soften a rival's heart, stir desire in a lover, or announce one's presence like a whispered secret that lingered after the voice was gone. Perfume filled the spaces between words, shaping impressions as surely as silks and jewels. Yet, even in this world of refinement, shadows gathered. For not all scents were what they seemed, and soon, among the whispers of love and ambition, there spread other rumors that perfume could caress the skin with sweetness, while carrying death beneath its fragrance. At first the whispers were faint, dismissed as jealous murmurs in a court where envy was as common as silk. But soon the stories multiplied. A husband struck down by sudden fever after sharing wine with his wife. A rival noblewoman who collapsed in her chamber, her skin pale as wax, her lips stained faintly though no wound could be found. Servants spoke of powders hidden in cosmetics, of oils that carried death when brushed upon the skin, of perfumes whose sweetness concealed their bitterness. Perfume, once the emblem of beauty, began to acquire another meaning. Behind each vial of crystal, behind each ornate stopper, there might be more than seduction. There might be poison. A gift of fragrance could no longer be trusted. Was it a token of admiration or a silent dagger carried on the air itself? In salons and chambers, the women of the court perfected this art of duality. With a smile they offered a handkerchief steeped in roses, with a whisper they ordered a perfumer to lace it with arsenic. In their cabinets, beside bottles of ambergris and violet, lay phials of mercury, antimony and belladonna. They learned to mask the sharpness of toxins with the sweetness of flowers, crafting mixtures as dangerous as they were delicate. Thus the court of France became a theatre where scent was both allure and threat. A breath could intoxicate, a kiss could destroy, and beauty itself became the perfect disguise for death. The rise of the poison trade. Beneath the glitter of the French court, another world thrived, a world of shadows and secrecy. In the narrow streets of Paris, away from the salons and gilded halls, apothecaries and perfumers mixed more than oils of rose and jasmine. Hidden behind respectable facades, they prepared powders, tinctures, and essences that could seduce with scent while killing with silence. The market for poison grew in the very heart of refinement. Noble women whispered instructions through veils, slipping coins into the hands of discreet merchants. Courtiers who smiled in daylight crept into back rooms at night, searching for remedies, not for illness, but for rivals. Even priests and confessors were rumored to know the recipes, some condemning them as devil's craft, others turning a blind eye when influence was too strong to resist. Poisons came in many forms. Some were powders slipped into wine, their taste hidden by spices from the Orient. Others were oils, brushed on the skin and absorbed without a trace. And the most feared of all were perfumes, fragrances indistinguishable from innocent luxuries, save for the death they carried. A handkerchief, a vial, a drop upon the wrist, all could deliver the same quiet end. This clandestine trade did not grow in silence by chance. It grew because the demand was constant, for in a court ruled by envy and ambition, there was always someone to remove, always someone who stood in the way of power. The poison trade grew not in silence but in demand. In a court where rivalries bloomed like flowers, each alliance carried with it a shadow, and each ambition birthed an enemy. Perfumers who once catered only to the elegance of nobles soon found themselves crafting phials of secrecy, perfumes that soothed the senses while masking deadly powders. Their clients were not only the desperate but the powerful. Noble women who smiled sweetly at banquets ordered elixirs to rid themselves of cruel husbands. Courtiers sought mixtures to remove rivals before they reached the king's ear. Even men of rank, bound by political gains, whispered their requests in the same perfumed chambers where they once bargained for musk and ambergris. The language of purchase was careful. No one asked directly for death. Instead, they requested a remedy for persistence or a fragrance to end suffering. Behind these phrases lay arsenic, mercury, and aconite, toxins veiled in delicacy, prepared with the same hands that crafted the scents of violets and roses. Over time, this underground market grew bold, its artisans boasting of their skill as discreetly as poets of their verse. The court began to murmur not only of perfumes to delight, but of perfumes to kill. And in this duality, sweetness laced with silence, France entered an age where scent itself became a weapon and beauty a mask for crime. The women who killed with scent. Among the glittering ladies of Renaissance France, some carried secrets as lethal as any blade. They moved through banquets draped in silk and jewels, their laughter as sweet as their perfumes, but behind their smiles lay calculations sharper than steel. In a court where a woman's influence was measured by the men she swayed, perfume became not only her weapon of allure, but her weapon of destruction. Whispers named them les empoisonneuses, the poisoners. Some were courtesans, skilled in beauty and conversation, whose survival depended on pleasing powerful men. Others were noble women, bound in marriages of convenience, who sought freedom from cruel husbands. They carried fans steeped in fragrance, handkerchiefs brushed with invisible toxins, rings with tiny cavities that released powder with a touch. One gesture could be enough, a kiss on the cheek, a drop of perfume upon the skin, a gift passed from hand to hand. Victims fell not in duels or in battles, but in parlours and bedchambers, their deaths hidden behind fevers and fainting fits. Physicians, unskilled in detecting the subtle craft of poison, often declared these ends natural, never knowing that death had been carried to their patients in the sweetness of roses or the delicacy of violet. To the court, these women were admired for their elegance, envied for their influence, feared for their beauty, but behind closed doors, they became architects of silence, weaving their rivalries into mixtures that killed without trace, leaving only perfume lingering in the air. Some names slipped through the veil of rumour into infamy. Among them was Catherine Montvoisin, remembered simply as La Voisin, a fortune-teller and midwife who became the most feared figure of the Parisian underworld. Behind her respectable trade, she supplied noble women with powders, potions and perfumes that promised release from rivals, release from husbands, release from the burdens of power. Her clientele reached into the very heart of Versailles, where whispers claimed that even ladies of the king's inner circle sought her aid. Others were less notorious, their identities blurred by secrecy, but their actions no less deadly. A countess who wished to rid herself of a cruel husband allegedly brushed his gloves with a tincture that poisoned him through the skin. A courtesan, threatened by a rival, was said to have offered her a vial of violet water that carried aconite instead of blossoms. These stories, whether fully true or embroidered by rumour, fed the fear that perfume itself had become an assassin's tool. The danger lay in invisibility. Unlike the dagger or the cup of poison wine, these weapons left no mark. Death arrived like a faint illness, a sudden weakness, a quiet collapse. The physicians of the day, bound by limited knowledge, blamed fever, bad air, or divine punishment. Few suspected that the sweet scent still lingering on a victim's skin was the very cause of their end. In this way, women who moved through the court as ornaments of beauty and grace became figures of dread, their perfumes entranced, their smiles disarmed, and yet in their hands the very essence of refinement was twisted into an instrument of death. The affair of the poisons. By the late 17th century, the whispers of poison could no longer be ignored. Rumours had seeped from salons and bedchambers into the very heart of Versailles, where even the Sun King himself began to fear that the perfumes drifting through his court carried death. The scandal that erupted became known as l'affaire des poisons, the affair of the poisons, a storm that revealed the shadows beneath the brilliance of France's golden age. It began with sudden deaths too numerous, too convenient to be dismissed. Husbands collapsing at feasts, rivals perishing in their sleep, noblemen weakened without cause. Physicians spoke of fevers, but the patterns were too sharp, the coincidences too many. Behind the perfumes, the powders and the prayers lay an underground network of poisoners whose reach extended into the noblest families of France. Accusations spread like wildfire. Ladies of the highest rank were whispered to have consulted witches, perfumers, and alchemists. Servants carried vials of suspicious liquid. Lovers exchanged gifts scented with death, and the king himself wondered whether the air he breathed was safe. Versailles, once the symbol of order and majesty, became a theatre of fear, where every gesture carried suspicion and every fragrance a shadow of doubt. The arrests began swiftly. Suspected poisoners were dragged from their homes, their workshops searched, their vials and powders seized. Some confessed under torture, others died with silence on their lips, but each revelation drew the scandal closer to the very heart of the court. What had begun in whispers now thundered in fear, and all of France watched as elegance and death became inseparable. The trials that followed were unlike anything France had ever seen. Conducted in secrecy, far from the glitter of Versailles, they became a theatre of confession, accusation, and fear. In dark chambers, by the light of torches, magistrates questioned perfumers, alchemists, and noble women alike. Torture loosened tongues, and from those tongues spilled the names of courtiers, duchesses, even members of the royal household. Each testimony drew the scandal closer to the king. It was said that Louis XIV himself trembled at the possibility that poison might touch his table or seep into his bedchamber. His paranoia deepened as the list of the accused grew longer, and trust within the palace dissolved. Where once the air was heavy with the perfume of roses, now it reeked of suspicion. Executions soon followed. Some poisoners were burned alive, their cries rising over Paris as warnings to others. Others vanished into prisons, their fates sealed in silence, their names erased but never forgotten. The spectacle of punishment was meant to cleanse the court of fear, yet it only deepened the sense of dread. For if such crimes had reached the noblest salons, who could be trusted? Who was safe? The affair of the poisons did not merely expose individual crimes, it revealed the fragility of power itself. The elegance of Versailles had always been a mask, and now that mask cracked, revealing a world where ambition and desire had turned perfume into death, and where even the King of France lived under a shadow of fear, perfume, death and power. In the wake of the affair, Perfume could never again be seen as innocent. What had once been a symbol of refinement and seduction was now bound to the fear of death. Every vial, every scented handkerchief, every gift of fragrance carried with it the weight of suspicion, for in the court of France, scent had become a language not only of desire, but of power. To present perfume to another was to offer more than sweetness. It was to remind them of vulnerability. The gesture, once delicate and romantic, now carried menace. Courtiers whispered that to refuse such a gift was to risk insult, but to accept it was to gamble with one's life. Love and death became inseparable, woven together in the fragrance of roses and lilies. For the powerful, poison was not merely a weapon of jealousy or vengeance, it was a political instrument. Enemies could be removed without open conflict, rivals silenced without scandal. A drop of oil upon a glove, a powder mixed into wine, a perfume brushed upon the skin, each became a tool of strategy, as precise and deliberate as any sword upon the battlefield. The court itself became a labyrinth of suspicion, where no alliance was pure and no gesture without consequence. Power was no longer defined solely by the king's decree, but by the unseen hand that could place death in a vial and call it perfume. Paranoia spread through Versailles like a shadow no light could disperse. Courtiers eyed one another with suspicion, their smiles frozen, their gestures calculated. A goblet of wine left unattended was no longer trusted. A gift of scented gloves was accepted only with trembling fingers. Even the simplest pleasures, a kiss upon the hand, a fan brushed across the cheek, became fraught with danger. Servants, once invisible, now carried the weight of rumor. Did they slip powders into the king's food? Did they deliver vials to mistresses under cover of night? Every action was scrutinized, every whisper magnified, until the court itself seemed less a palace of brilliance than a prison gilded in gold. The fear touched even Louis XIV. The Sun King, who had built Versailles as a monument to control, now found that within his own walls he could not master the air he breathed. He ordered stricter surveillance, secret councils, and new laws, yet suspicion lingered, for no matter how many poisoners burned, the memory of what perfume could conceal clung to the court like a fragrance that would never fade. Thus, in the heart of France's golden age, perfume ceased to be only an emblem of beauty. It became a reminder of fragility, a symbol of treachery, and a weapon wielded as silently as a whisper in the dark. Legacy of fragrance and fear. Long after the trials ended and the executions silenced the voices of the accused, the memory of the perfumed poisoners lingered in France. Their story clung to the air like the very scents they had once wielded, faint, sweet, and yet laced with menace. For though the courts sought to erase the scandal, it remained etched in whispers, in pamphlets, in the fearful glances exchanged whenever perfume was offered as a gift. Writers and chroniclers embellished the tales, transforming fact into legend. They spoke of duchesses who carried vials hidden in jeweled rings, of courtesans who killed with a kiss, of perfumers who mixed roses with arsenic as easily as they blended musk with amber, whether truth or invention. These stories ensured that perfume would never again be associated solely with beauty. It had become a double symbol of allure and of death. In salons and parlors, women continued to dab fragrance on their wrists and necks, but always with a shadow of caution. What had once been a sign of seduction now bore the memory of poison. A lingering trace of jasmine or violet could stir not only desire but unease, the reminder that sweetness could conceal silence and that the most delicate pleasures could also destroy. The legacy of the perfumed poisoners outlived their victims, their trials, and even their century. In time, France forgot their names, but it never forgot the fear. The notion that a simple vial of fragrance could conceal death became woven into the very fabric of cultural memory. Perfume remained a treasure of beauty, but always with an undercurrent of dread. For Perfume, once an emblem of refinement, had revealed its darker nature. It taught that elegance could be a mask, that sweetness could be a disguise, and that power often works not through steel or fire, but through subtler means. In the silence of Versailles' gilded halls, the faintest trace of scent might carry not allure, but suspicion. Centuries later, the stories linger still in novels, in legends, in the uneasy fascination with perfumes and poisons alike. They remind us that beauty and danger are often intertwined, and that behind the most delicate fragrance may lie the most ruthless intent. Thus the tale of the perfumed poisoners endures, a warning whispered through time that even in the brightest courts, behind the silks and jewels, behind the fans and smiles, death may hide in the sweetness of roses.